Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 216. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Raymond Paul Johnson about his debut novel, Conspiracy Ignited. Ray's main character is a former CIA combat pilot turned California litigator named Eric Ridge. As the book opens, an attempt is made on Ridge's life, which sets off a twisty, suspense-filled game of cat and mouse that ultimately leads to his discovery of a powerful cabal vying for control of the U.S. legal system. In this fast-paced thriller, Ray covers everything from civil trial lawyers to CIA operatives, and the world of aviation to the post-combat experiences of military veterans. Ray has wanted to be a writer since high school, but he had a number of other careers: engineer, Air Force pilot, CIA pilot, and civil trial lawyer, before finally publishing Conspiracy Ignited. In this episode, I'll chat with Ray about his writing journey, why he decided to focus the conspiracies in the novel on the judiciary and the jury system, and why the theme of tough never quits is found not only in his debut novel, but in all of his careers to date, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Raymond Paul Johnson, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Stacey, and thanks for inviting me.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your debut novel, Conspiracy Ignited. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
All right. It follows a civil trial lawyer. He's based out of Los Angeles. Actually, a lesser known place than Los Angeles. It's part of Los Angeles. It's called the South Bay. A lot of people know it also as the beach cities. They're south of Los Angeles Airport. Anyway, that's where his law firm is, and that's where he operates out of. There's a backstory to that, but I'll leave that to the readers. Anyway, through one of his cases, he doesn't know why, but he gets involved with a secret society. He actually gets attacked one night and has no idea why, and goes to the hospital, comes out, and the attacks continue. It turns out that one of his cases is unwittingly involved with a secret society that's trying to take over the judges and courts of America. And he is in their way. They've told him to get out of his way, and he's not the type of person that does that. He basically is, of course, a trial lawyer, but before that, he was a pilot in the Air Force, and he was a paramilitary pilot for the CIA. And he just doesn't listen to bad people trying to bully him. So he refuses. Now, the inspiration was, I've been a thriller writer all my life, a thriller reader, all my life. I mean, some of my favorites are Michael Connelly with the Lincoln Lawyer series, and I love adventure and action thrillers too. Been following Clive Cussler since I was a kid. He did the Dirk Pitt series. His son now, Dirk Cussler, is continuing it since he died, unfortunately. In any event, the inspiration was that looking at all that work, I saw two missing things. One, most of the lawyers in these thrillers are either criminal defense lawyers or corporate lawyers of some type. And I really haven't seen a full book. There may be one out there, but I haven't read it involving a civil trial lawyer, someone who represents everyday people against the gigantic corporations of the world. So I wanted to fill that hole. Another thing I saw was missing was generally the domestic terrorists that are involved in these thrillers in America. They either headed against the executive branch, they try to kidnap the president or one of the secretary of state, whatever, or the legislative branch of the government, that is, senators or congressmen that they may try to intimidate, terrorize. But I hadn't seen much, or at least not a full book, written about a domestic terrorist group going after the judiciary, the judges and justices, the court system itself, the jury system. And I thought that was important enough to explore. So that's what set me down to the typewriter.
So you've covered a lot in this book, and I'm gonna want to talk about it. But first, I think we should talk about your main character, Eric Ridge. So, what do readers need to know before they pick up the book? What would be helpful for them to know about Eric Ridge?
Well, he's a first of all, he does civil litigation only. He's not a criminal defense lawyer. He doesn't get involved in criminal cases. But his background is that he's a military veteran. He was a combat pilot, both for the Air Force and the CIA. Lurking in the background, kind of unknown to him, he is suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder. And the things that happen to him accelerate that, which does happen in real life with people who suffer that. And that makes his going even rougher than it is. But it's the other thing is the organization he's going up against, he really has no clue. He is just trying to find out who is harassing him, his family, and his friends. So there's a lot of investigation that goes on. In that regard, he counts on his best friend, who is an investigator at his law firm, a fellow named Terry Powell. And Terry has a history with Eric, which I don't want to get into because it's part of the surprises in the book. But let's just say they're very close friends and have a kind of a unique relationship. And they both get pretty embroiled with this secret society, which, by the way, is called the Raven Society.
And another supporting cast member is Ridge's wife. What should readers know about her? Because she plays a role.
She plays a big role, both in Eric's life and in the novel itself. Her name is Jane, Jayne. So it's Jane Ridge, and she's concerned about Eric and his PTSD even before these things start to happen. And of course, she's part of the victims that are chased by the Raven Society, which makes it even worse for Eric Ridge. She works at his firm, and she is their computer expert basically. And in that way, through computer systems, she helps his investigator Terry Powell try to understand what's going on.
Well, let's talk about sort of the counterpoint to your protagonist. Let's talk about the villain, or villains, maybe we should say, in the book. So you mentioned the Raven Society, but there's another key villain.
Yeah, this certainly is. That man's name is Calvin Hess. Calvin Hess, Hess. I spent a lot of time in the book exploring Calvin because he is not your typical bad guy in a sense. Here's his attributes. First of all, for reasons that the reader will find out, he is a cold-blooded killer. In fact, his reputation is that he kills without leaving a trace. And he is the main enforcer for the Raven Society. There's another really masterful antagonist, too. In a way, it's Calvin Hess's boss. I don't want to talk too much about him because he's a mysterious character through most of the book. He is referred to as His Eminence, and he is the head of the Raven Society, One of the mysteries in the book is who really is His Eminence. And throughout the book, we get closer, and closer until at the end, even Eric Ridge understands who he is.
As you mentioned, this book covers touches on a lot of topics. So you mentioned civil trial litigation, which many readers may not be overly familiar with. There's a lot of media portrayals of the criminal side of the legal system, but not necessarily the civil side. So you're covering the civil side of the judicial system. You've got this powerful cabal, the idea that somebody may be taking over, influencing, controlling this branch of our government. You've also touched on the world of aviation that you cover in the book. You talk about combat veterans and sort of the ramifications of what happens to them. The CIA gets involved. So you've got, it's quite a mix. How do you keep track of it all? What is your process for making sure, one, you spend enough time on all the things you want to spend time on, and two, you keep the plot moving?
Right. Yeah. First of all, there are 5 points of view in the book. One of them, of course, is Eric Ridge, primary one. Another is his investigator, Terry Powell. Then Calvin Hess has a point of view, and a few other characters that I'll leave out right now who are secondary, but important enough to have that point of view. I'm a pantser. In other words, I do not outline a plot at all. In fact, generally when I start a scene, I don't even know how the scene's going to end, let alone the chapter, let alone the book. What I do is I follow the characters. They lead me. So when I started the book, I sat down and scene one, all I knew was that Eric Ridge was going to be attacked. And that's about all I knew. And then we started. Of course, being a pantser, or what they sometimes call an organic writer, there's a lot of rewriting involved. So because none of us can just whip off a novel, that's just doesn't happen. Well, I mean, maybe there's some like the master of crime fiction, James Lee Burke. Maybe he does that. But I know even like a Michael Connelly readily admits that he's a pantser, but then he has to do a lot of rewriting. So did Hemingway. And I guess my writing process is really Hemingway type writing. I really only use short sentences, short paragraphs, and short chapters. And that helps almost every pre-release reviewer mentioned what a page turner it was, how fast you had to go through it. But what really helps that is, of course, having short chapters so people can race through the book and yet still understand the content and follow all the characters.
Yeah. Now, that style of writing, did that just come naturally with your fiction writing, or is that something you honed through your legal career?
Well, that's an interesting point, by the way. Perhaps I had never thought of that. Perhaps it does come from my legal career, because when I wrote briefs and motions and things like that, I generally did not outline them. I just knew the very major points, and then I went into it and rewrote after that. So yeah, that's very interesting, very insightful, Stacy. Thank you. Yeah, yeah, that tells me something. But really, what I thought up to this point happened was when I decided to write the novel, I started to look into different authors. I became a member of the International Thriller Writers and Mystery Writers of America, and looked at the types. And I started right at the beginning. I tried to do an outline, and it just didn't work for me. There was no surprise. There was no. I mean, what I love about writing is the surprise I get as a writer, let alone what the reader gets. And if I know what's going to happen chapter by chapter or throughout the whole book, it rips that surprise away, and then I don't enjoy the writing. I mean, it's just at that point, it's just work. And that's not why I'm in as an author here. I want to enjoy myself while I'm doing it.
Well, let's talk about those surprises because a lot of pantsers I talk to mention usually arriving at some point in the story and realizing that the character has taken them down a road they really did not expect or really shocked them by something the character wanted to say, something the character wanted to do, and they had to rethink maybe where the story was going. Have you ever had that experience where something really, really threw you for a loop?
All of the time. That's what's fun. That is the fun. Yeah. I mean, I'm halfway through my second novel now, at least the first draft of it, and it's a follow-on because it's the Eric Ridge thriller series, and they're still surprising me left and right. The characters. I mean, Jane was just kidnapped. I didn't know she was going to be kidnapped in the second
Goodness.
book. Yeah, so that's the sort of thing that goes on, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, if I had to sit down and outline a whole book and then fill in the blanks, it would kill me. I know there are a lot of great authors that do that. James Patterson, for instance, Jeffrey Devers does it that way. He outlines the whole book, but it just ain't for me.
So I'm curious, as you're going through and it's just one surprise after another, how much do you find real life seeping into your work? Because even though it's fiction, we all know most of it is make believe. A lot of writers find that either their own real world experiences or those of people they know end up creeping into the book, intentionally or unintentionally. How much do you find real life influencing what it is that you're writing?
This may be one reason why I'm such a free form pantser, I guess, if you want to call me that. Almost every scene or every major scene in the book is based on a composite of something I've either been part of or witnessed in my life. As a lawyer, as a combat pilot, as a civilian pilot, it is. It's all based, at least to one degree or another, on actual happenings. It's true throughout the book, except for the Raven Society itself. That of course is fiction. But even I've had other readers in pre-release say that it reminded them of certain groups, and perhaps it does. It wasn't intentional if it did, but I won't say one way or the other. But other than the Raven Society itself, I think everything else is based on things that have happened to or around me during my life.
Hmm. Now, I'm curious whether writing fiction like this is something that you have always wanted to do. Because if it is, how early did you know you wanted to do it, and why the circuitous route you took to get here?
Yeah, well, it wasn't circuitous. I don't. It was not circuitous at all. I mean, I know one would think so, but you got to take me back to high school. I had a history teacher who made a pretty big impact on my life. Her name was Mrs. Kratinoff. I had her second and third year of high school. And then in my senior year, I did not have her in a class, but I got accepted to school, to college, and went up to her and I said, "Hey, Mrs. Kratinoff, I just got accepted to college." And she goes, "Oh, good. Which one was that?" And I said, "NYU." And she says, "Oh, good, good, good. And what major?" And I said, "Well, engineering, because I'm going to be an engineer and then I'm going to be a pilot in the Air Force." And there was silence and then there was laughter. She laughed at me. And I said, "What? What's wrong?" She says, "Ray, if you would have said lawyer or writer, I would have went with it. But engineer and pilot, no way." Of course, being the way I am, I went ahead and became a engineer and then a pilot. Actually worked on the space shuttle program as an engineer, but always with thinking about writing, always. And at NYU, what I loved about NYU when at the time that I went, they they were well grounded in the liberal arts. I had some amazing literature and writing courses, but I also had the high tech engineering too, which I needed to graduate, and that stuck with me. Also, as a lawyer, I loved writing and editing. I, I, I mean, I had my own law firm, and the associates and paralegals would write motions and briefs, and they'd give it to me and they know I would edit it a lot because that's just me. I didn't. I told them it wasn't anything personal. That's just me. And I wrote. I actually have published with a co-author a treatise, 850-page treatise, which is a nonfiction book called Effective Product Evidence to Verdict. But all that being said, it wasn't fiction, and I was reading fiction the whole time, and that burned. That burned. And then along came COVID, and I kind of realized if I'm ever going to write that novel or novels, this is the time to crank back my practice and do it. Because while I was a lawyer, I found it impossible to do it. I tried. I drove my secretary nuts at times because I'd bring her these things and she'd type them up, but they were fragments. They never got together. And I knew I had to dedicate myself to it at one level or another before. So today, I only practice law in two areas. One, I instruct legal classes and trial law, product liability, and aviation safety at the University of Southern California on a part-time basis. And then part-time, I'm a consultant in just some select cases around the country that interest me. But other than that, I spend my time writing.
I'm curious what other goals you have for yourself as a writer. You mentioned you're working on the second book and your plan is to make this a series. So let's start there. Do you have a goal for the series? Do you have a number of books, or is the idea that you'll just continue to write it as long as these characters interest you?
It's the latter.
Mm.
But I know I'll have a second. I mean, because I'm halfway through with the first draft, and I know there'll be a second. I imagine there'll be a third because that's the type of person I am. Remember, I do have a background as an engineer, so there's something about a trilogy that sounds great to me.
Right.
On the other hand, I've been to presentations by Michael Connelly, for instance, who I think is a great writer, and his Bosch series, which I've read every single one of them, which is getting up around 30 now or 40. He never intended that to go 30 or 40. It just happens or it doesn't. And it's what you said. If the characters take me there, and they still keep interesting me, then I'm going to go with them because why shouldn't I? It's
Yeah.
fun. Yeah,
Right. Right. Keep writing till it's not fun anymore. Right. Is that
that's
the
right.
idea? Mm-hmm.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, what about other goals? Do you have other things you would like to do as a writer? I mean, other genres, other types of writing, anything else interest you?
I'll always be in the thriller category because that interests me. If I read regular murder mysteries, which sometimes I have to for other reasons, I get through them. I like them, but if there's no thrill in them, they don't interest me for long. I've got many, many that I've stopped one third of the way into the book or halfway into the book, and the bookmark stays there forever. That doesn't do much for me. I like to get to the end of things, so I stick with thrillers,
Yeah.
and I will as a writer too. The only aspect of this that might take me down another avenue, but it's related, would be, of course, if the books turn into films, then that would be a TV series or film or movies. That would be interesting to follow that, but I don't think I would stop the writing.
Well, you mentioned being an engineer and finding the balance of a trilogy appealing. These other careers, these other lives that you have led up until your current one as a fiction writer, what sort of skills or lessons from those careers do you bring to bear on your writing? Do you find any of them influencing either your process of writing or the subject matter in any particular way?
Yes, and primarily in this way. One of the themes of Conspiracy Ignited is something that the that Eric Ridge says to Terry Powell a lot when they get into a lot of trouble, and that happens all the time in the book, and they need to dig themselves out, and they just remind themselves. They just say three words: "Tough never quits," and that comes through in the novel. It's a major theme of the novel, and it has in all the careers that I've been involved in, whether it's flying jet aircraft or test flying airplanes or trying cases against the biggest corporations in the world or designing the space shuttle. I follow everything to logical conclusion. If I start something, I finish it. My daughter laughs at me because she still remembers as she was a child growing up that I would say, don't do things halfway. If you're if you're throwing darts at a board, aim for the bullseye. Those type of sayings have been with me since I was a little kid.
Mm. Well, if people want to learn more about you and the book, look for new releases, that sort of thing, where can they go to find you and that information?
Well, the best way, of course, is my website, my author's website, which is my name, RaymondPaulJohnson.com. On that, in fact, I've got more than that. I've got a lot about the book. I've got the frequently asked questions. I've got all of well, not all, because other pre-release reviews are coming in, but I've got many of the pre-release reviews in there in total, and rather than just a quote or blurb. So that's the place to start. And I've also got my email address there, and there's even a newsletter if people are interested.
Good, good. And you mentioned pre-release. When is it out?
Well, actually, it did come out June. It feels like yesterday, by the way, because I've been on well, it's been something. I started at the American Library Association with thousands of book lovers. That's where we basically released the book, and that was quite a thing in San Diego. But it released June 25th, so just a while ago. And tomorrow I'm doing my first Los Angeles book signing and readings at the Book Jewel, which is near LAX. It's a very nice bookstore near LAX.
Very good. So if people want to purchase a copy then of Conspiracy Ignited, where can they go to buy it?
Well, of course, my publisher is Amphoray Publishing, but it's really at all outlets: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, Bookshop.org. You can ask your librarian to bring it in if you're not a buyer of books, but rather a reader of books. And several librarians, I think, will do it as a result of my releasing the book at the American Library Association. So just about anywhere, every time. The independent bookstores, that's what the Book Jewel is. It's a large independent bookstore in Westchester, or the Westchester area of Los Angeles, which is near LAX.
Very good. Very good. Well, Ray, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Conspiracy Ignited. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Well, thank you, Stacy, for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.